weapon systems takes a long time from beginning to end. Then you got to start thinking more about software and how fast that moves. And is the Pentagon going to be ready to deal with procurement in a serious way? And that Congress has a role there. But again, I think the fundamental question for Congress is, where do they begin? I think they need industry experts and other technology leaders to give it guidance about where to begin, where to start, how they should do this, because I think they just aren't sure. I mean, they know they're going to need a federal preemption, that you can't have 50 state laws dealing with all this. I mean, if there was an interstate issue, this is it. I mean, yeah. It's more than an interstate issue. But so clearly, they know they're going to have to preempt the states at some point. There'll be federalism fights and all that. But that's going to happen. But then it's an open slate. Where do we go from? And does Congress need to create a separate entity to regulate AI? Or do we house it at NIST or, wherever, Commerce, Pentagon? I don't know. But that's more questions than answers.
Could it help the Pentagon pass an audit?
1,000% yes. It absolutely can help the Pentagon pass an audit. I would be surprised if every single one of the AI companies didn't have that on their list of use cases to talk about through the CDAO contracts that we all just got. But some of the most transformational things are going to be the boring back office things, and they're going to free up incredible resources for the Defense Department to do things that would be unsustainable if it had to do them by continuing to do things the way we've always done them. And so, when I think about risk, people ask me all the time, what do I think is the biggest risk from AI? And my answer is always the same. The biggest risk is keeping on doing things the same way that we've always been doing them. That is actually, of all the things that I'm worried about, the one that worries me the most.
I think, Kaitlan, there is a provision in the draft NDA to do precisely this, to use AI to get us audits.
We'll see if it happens. Please let us know. I do want to take some audience questions. I know this is a high interest subject. We'll start here at the front.
Thank you. Shashank Joshi, The Economist. Thank you for your very thought-provoking comments. TARUN, you talked about agentic warfare, and on the subject of use cases, I'd just be interested to hear from both of you. Sorry, shall I start again? Yeah. Can you hear me all?
Can you guys hear him?
Can you hear me?
Okay, you ask your question and then I'll repeat it.
Shout, okay.
Yeah.
On the subject of agentic warfare, TARUN, you raised it, and on use cases, what does agentic intelligence look like in this context? And a lot of the use cases you're discussing are analysis. Is there a use case in intelligence collection in operations that you're also seeing or could envision?
Yeah, look, I think this is simply about AI using tools, and so this could be an AI, an agent doing things in cyberspace. It could be a team of agents doing things in cyberspace. You can imagine in many other domains. I think, to Katrina's point earlier, is we don't know yet what exactly the interaction looks like, but I think it's something we're going to have to get our hands around much sooner than we think, particularly as we know that when our companies release agents into the commercial world, we all have safeguards teams looking at what our adversaries are trying to do to use them and experiment with them. And that's obviously really important information that we need to share with the US government.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I was trying, if the mic didn't work. Thank you very much for this panel. It's very, very interesting. I was wondering, how do you see the investment and the growth of AI in developing countries, such as in nations in Africa, Latin America, and I like what you said on putting technology in the hands of the people, how you see that on developing countries. Thank you so much.
I can start. I mean, one, I see there's a lot more trust in AI and excitement about what it can do in developing countries than there is in the Western world, as I was mentioning earlier. One of the things that, I think everybody's hungry to see what it can do. I think it also creates risk for the US and the Western world that if Chinese models and open source models are out there and being able to be used and people are building on top of them, then the values that are imbued in those systems are going to be the values that are in the models that people are using. And so I think we really need to think about it through a strategic competition lens. one of the things I loved that we did a little over a year ago at OpenAI is we actually created 1-800-CHATGPT, and we made one of the things we realized is that the biggest gap is actually in people's access to Wi-Fi. So if you don't have Wi-Fi, you're going to have a hard time using our tools and technology in the way that you can. So 1-800-CHATGPT gave you the ability to call and have conversations over the phone using our voice mode rather than having to have Wi-Fi. You could just, if you had a phone line, you had access, and that opened the aperture tremendously. And it's something that I think made, we found a lot of people using the technology for advice on health and like reproductive health and all of these, we found really incredible use cases in the developing world that were made possible because, we figured out how to bring it to where people are.
That's so interesting. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
Hello, thank you for being here. My name is Victoria. I'm part of this year's Rising Leaders class. And my question is, how do you see this technology shaping younger generations, particularly Generation Alpha? They're not only going to be digital nomads, but AI nomads. We've seen, natives. We've seen critical thinking skills of children go down with the use of AI. We've seen those cases of a child attempting against his own life because of the conversations he's been having with a chatbot. What are some pros of having children grow up this way, and what are we doing from your side on the private sector to prepare and protect our children?
This goes way beyond my expertise, but I'll say I think it raises a broader point, which is what is the responsibility of companies operating at the frontier when we know our technology is going to have transformative impacts on jobs, on education, on healthcare, on national security. And so our view has been we need to put resources against bringing best-in-class expertise, say in the case of job impacts, economists, to the company to interface with our technologists so they can understand what will it mean in particular sectors, because the real answers to many of these questions is we don't know yet. And in many cases, people who study these areas don't know the technology well enough, and they wouldn't, it's not clear how they would. So that's something that we all, I think, have to do as frontier companies, and we need to bring all of these discussions out into the open. I think sometimes there are closed-door discussions, in C-suites or conferences where people are talking about what the job impacts might be, but we don't talk about them openly. I think it needs to be much more transparent.
Yeah, and it is a question. Go ahead.
But there's also a role, there's a question about what is the responsibility of these companies, and I think that's one that we take pretty seriously, and I know other AI companies do as well. But there's also a bigger question, which is what is the role of the government and of society to think about this too? The best analogy that I have for what this moment is and what to compare it to is the advent of electricity. And I think that the makers of electricity had to contend with some of it, but they had government partnership to help them figure out how to safely, we don't even think about the fact that we're sitting a few feet away from an electrical outlet that could, in theory, kill us at any moment of the day, because we've figured out how to make it safe enough for people to use and to use in ways that are productive, and help us in society. We're gonna have to do the same thing with AI, the same technology that is going to enable all of the incredible things that we've talked about on the stage will undoubtedly enable some things that we don't want. And figuring out how to do that is kind of a whole of society responsibility.
And remember when Edison had the discoveries on electricity, many people at that time thought it was too dangerous of a technology for common people to use.
I'm not going to bring this back to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but there was a question when I was studying that was, who was the first president who lived in the White House with electricity but was too scared to actually flip the light switches himself? William Henry Harrison. It was $1 million question in case anyone's curious. Go ahead in the back. Yeah. All of you. Yeah, don't worry, we'll get to you. We have 6 minutes.
Thanks very much. Emma Belcher, President of Ploughshares Nuclear Weapons Threat Reduction Organisation. KATRINA, I was thrilled to hear you say use caution when thinking about the battlefield. And I wanted to get your reaction to studies that we've seen recently that have shown that increasingly wargaming that relies on AI is resulting in escalation that leads to nuclear use disproportionately. This to me suggests that maybe there's some bias in the data and the algorithms, which potentially has pretty damaging implications. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on that case.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, we actually did a war game. We hosted a war game here at the Aspen Security Forum prior to the start of the regular program. It didn't lead to that outcome. So I'm not familiar with the studies that you're citing, but here's what I will tell you that I am excited about, and I think, knowing your background, that you will be interested in this as well. One of the partnerships, our first partnership with the federal government actually was with the U.S. National Labs. And we have decided to deploy our model weights. We have deployed them for the first time ever outside of our own infrastructure inside a U.S. government secure classified supercomputer. And what it is enabling us to do is to really help advance the frontier of science in a way that allows us to do increasingly complicated math and scientific discovery that are essential to underpinning our commitment to no nuclear testing. Because every year, the NNSA has to certify the viability of the nuclear stockpile, and every year doing that gets harder and harder and harder. And I am really excited about the possibility that we are actually going to facilitate maintaining U.S. policy on this for a longer time period than we ever would have without this technology. And I think that would be an amazing outcome of the use of this technology for national security.
Go ahead.
Thank you to the panel. Great discussion. I was hoping you could comment on access to talent, even in the context of national security. It occurs to me, and I think anybody observing, that so many of the top AI researchers are foreign born, and we also see a number of changes to student visa programs, access to grants, funding and such, that might be making the United States less hospitable location for drawing in the world's talent.
Well, it's already happening. I've been talking to academic leaders who've been telling me that that some of their top talent is being courted heavily by Europe right now. And I think this country, and I think policymakers, if they're listening, that they need to continue to make major investments in basic research. We have to, because our competitors, especially the Chinese, are making those investments, as are our friends in Europe. They're doing the same thing. And we are really at risk of a brain drain. I mean, that's been our advantage. The talent's always come here, and I think that's been a big part of our technological edge in so many areas, from medical research to quantum computing to you name it. We've been the leaders. But it's a real threat. It's a problem. And I think the Congress is going to have to step up and reassert itself on that very issue where it's been so strong for a very long time.
Yeah, look, the competition in AI boils down to chips, talent, and energy. And in all three, we ought to be maxing out everything we can do. That's how you get to AI dominance.
Well, and when you are in this book about the development of the nuclear weapon, I mean, you realize how many of these scientists were driven to the United States by the war in Europe. And just to think about that, if that had not happened and we had not had those brilliant minds working in the lab, is a fascinating part of this as well. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Hi, my name is Shannon. I'm with the Rising Leaders, and I'm a public diplomacy practitioner in Denver. And so, Katrina, what you were saying about the values instilled in certain large language models, depending on where they're coming from, reminds me of some conversations that I've had with some of my international exchange participants about, so my broader question is, who decides what the values are that are instilled in the large language models that we're working with, especially coming from the private sector? I'm sure many of us have seen some of the challenges that Grok has had. And so who makes those decisions? Who's controlling those buttons?
So right now, it's the AI companies themselves, and there isn't any real regulation or oversight of how we do that. The way that we do it at OpenAI, we have a model policy team that develops something that we call the model spec. And if you guys are interested in this question, which I think is a super important question, you should pull out your phone and pull up the model spec, because what we did, and now other companies have done as well, is we published it. We actually wrote down what we taught the model and why, and how we taught it to, you know, what values we instilled, and then we made that transparently available to everybody. Now, I don't think people have, you know, we did that because we think that we should have a debate as a society about what values, you know, we made certain decisions and trade-offs in doing that. You may not agree with all of them. We should have that discussion. We should have that debate as a society. The AI companies do it all a little bit differently, some of them a lot differently. And, you know, I think in the end, what is different between, you know, building on top of American AI versus building on top of Chinese AI is that we're being transparent about the values we're instilling in the model, and they are not.
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. You're probably going to hear much more about it in the next, you know, few weeks or so in Washington. But I think the best you can do is be transparent, to Katrina's point, about what you were doing to train the model. And I think it's okay that there will be some models that are going to be trained a bit differently depending on a number of considerations. But so long as you know what you are getting, and then there are market dynamics, right, where enterprises choosing to go, you know, with certain kinds of models. You have consumers choosing to go with certain kinds of models as well. But I think the key thing is, are we being as transparent as possible about how we're doing this?
The only thing I'd say in conclusion is that you know, one of our key policy objectives has to be making sure the development of AI aligns with our values and our interests. And that's why this diffusion of this technology, we want to make sure people are using American systems so we can control the systems and our values, as opposed to maybe the Chinese, and God knows what they'll do on surveillance and other things. So that's the issue. We have to make sure it aligns with our interests and our values.
And there's another panel tomorrow that will focus more exclusively on what that looks like with China, which I think will be a fascinating conversation. Thank you all. That was great. I really enjoyed that, and I hope you all did as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That snuck up on us. Just a little housekeeping. For those of you who would like to have lunch, there's going to be a fascinating continuing conversation in the basement on AI with Craig Mundy and Anya on his recent book, and also tent outside. See you at 1:30 back in here for Adam Bowler. Thank you.